Have you ever noticed something strange the moment you stop chasing? The moment you stop sending that extra message? The moment you decide your peace matters more than proving your love? Everything changes, not because you become someone else, but because you've stopped carrying a relationship by yourself. Distance has a language. Sometimes it says, I'm overwhelmed. Sometimes it says, I need space. But sometimes, distance is a silent test to see how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice just to keep someone close. And here's what many people never realize. When you match a man's distance instead of fighting against it, something unexpected begins happening inside his mind. Not every man reacts the same way. Some panic, some reflect, some feel relief, some discover feelings they never understood while you were always available. Today we're going to explore what really happens psychologically and emotionally when you stop chasing and start choosing yourself. Let's begin. People get comfortable with what they believe will never leave. That's not cruelty every time. It's human nature. When someone sees your name lighting up their phone every morning, hears your voice every night, feels your support through every storm, they slowly stop noticing the effort behind your love. What once felt special begins to feel ordinary. They stop asking themselves how lucky they are because they assume tomorrow will always look like today. That's where everything begins to change. The moment you stop chasing, stop forcing conversation, stop carrying a connection that was never meant to rest on one pair of shoulders, something shifts. The silence you've been afraid of suddenly becomes louder than every word you've spoken before. A man who believed your presence was guaranteed now has to face a question he never thought he'd ask. What if she's really gone? You see, certainty is comfortable. People sleep peacefully when they believe nothing will change. But take away that certainty, and the mind wakes up. Suddenly he notices the empty spaces where your energy used to live. The good morning message doesn't arrive. The check-in call never comes. The reassurance he's grown used to isn't waiting for him anymore. It's not because you're trying to punish him. It's because you finally decided your peace deserves the same protection your heart has been giving everyone else. Think about the little things people overlook every day. Clean water, good health, family sitting around the dinner table. Most people don't celebrate those blessings until they're threatened or taken away. Relationships often work the same way. We become blind to consistency because consistency feels permanent. But permanence is an illusion. Every connection survives only when two people choose it, again and again. Maybe you've been the one making excuses for his silence. Maybe you've convinced yourself he was just busy, stressed, distracted, or dealing with life. And maybe some of that was true. But somewhere along the way, you forgot to ask an important question. Who checks on the person who keeps checking on everyone else? The answer should never be nobody. When your effort disappears, it creates a mirror. Not a weapon, a mirror. It reflects every conversation you started, every apology you made first, every plan you organized, every moment you chose understanding over resentment. And for the first time, he has to see the relationship without your constant effort filling in the cracks. That realization can be uncomfortable. Comfort has a way of hiding truth. As long as someone keeps fixing every problem, nobody notices the foundation is breaking. But when the repairs stop, the damage becomes impossible to ignore. That's when questions begin to rise in his mind. Was I paying enough attention? Did I mistake loyalty for obligation? Did I assume she would always stay because she always had before? Those questions don't always arrive immediately. Pride is loud in the beginning. Ego tells people they're fine, that nothing has changed, that they'll hear from you eventually. But pride grows quieter when the days stretch into weeks and the silence remains. Reality has a way of speaking after excuses run out. The lesson isn't about making someone miss you. It's about refusing to disappear inside a relationship just to make someone else comfortable. Love isn't proven by how much of yourself you're willing to lose. Real love grows where appreciation lives, where effort is returned, and where both people understand that another person's heart is never something to take for granted. When you stop handing someone unlimited access to your time, your energy, and your emotional strength without receiving the same care in return, you're not becoming cold. You're becoming aware. You're remembering that your value was never measured by how hard you could chase someone who wasn't matching your steps. Sometimes the greatest wake-up call isn't an argument. It's the quiet realization that the person who always reached out has finally chosen themselves. And whether he changes or not, you've already taken the first step towards something bigger than his attention. You've reclaimed your own worth. Silence has a way of doing what words never could. It slows everything down. It removes the distractions, the excuses, and the constant noise that keeps people from facing what's really inside them. When you're always reaching out, always checking in, always keeping the conversation alive, there's little room for someone else to sit with their own thoughts. They're moving from one moment to the next, knowing you'll be there to bridge every gap. But the day you stop carrying the weight of the connection, something changes. The quiet you've left behind becomes impossible to ignore. At first, he may tell himself it doesn't matter. He may convince himself you're simply busy, that you'll text tomorrow, or that everything will go back to the way it was. That's how the mind protects itself from uncomfortable truths. It looks for simple explanations instead of difficult answers. But as time passes and your absence remains consistent, those explanations begin to lose their strength. The silence starts asking questions that only honesty can answer. That's when memories begin to return. Not because someone forced them to, but because the human heart naturally searches for what once made it feel safe, understood, or appreciated. Maybe he remembers the conversations that lasted late into the night when life felt lighter because someone was willing to listen without judgment. Maybe he remembers the way you celebrated his victories, no matter how small they seemed. Maybe he recalls the times you stood beside him when everyone else disappeared. These aren't dramatic moments from a movie. They're the quiet acts of love that often go unnoticed until they're no longer there. Life has an interesting way of revealing value through absence. Think about electricity. Most people never stop to appreciate it while the lights are on. They flip a switch without thinking twice. But the moment the power goes out, every little convenience suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. Relationships can be exactly the same. The things people take for granted become the very things they miss the most when they're gone. Psychologists have long understood that emotional distance often creates space for reflection. When the constant interaction disappears, the brain naturally begins replaying meaningful experiences. It isn't magic. It's simply how memory works. We tend to recognize the significance of people more clearly when they're no longer standing directly in front of us. The silence creates room for perspective, and perspective often reveals what routine has been hiding. But here's something important to remember. Your purpose isn't to create silence just so someone will think about you. That turns your peace into another strategy, another game, another attempt to control an outcome you were never meant to control. Real growth begins when you step back, because you respect yourself enough to stop forcing what should flow naturally. If someone reflects on your absence, let it happen because it's genuine, not because it was carefully engineered. Sometimes the hardest thing for anyone to do is sit alone with their own emotions. It's much easier to stay distracted, to scroll endlessly through a phone, to bury feelings under work, entertainment, or constant activity. But eventually, every person reaches a quiet moment where there are no more distractions left. That's where the truth often lives. That's where people begin asking themselves whether they appreciated the right things, whether they gave enough, or whether they allowed someone special to feel invisible. And if those questions arise, they don't appear because you demanded them. They appear because your absence created space for honesty. That's the power of stepping back with dignity. You're no longer trying to convince someone of your value. You're allowing life itself to reveal it. At the same time, something beautiful begins happening inside you. While someone else is reflecting on what your absence means, you're learning that your worth was never dependent on being constantly available. You're discovering that peace can exist without chasing, that confidence grows when you stop seeking validation, and that the strongest relationships are never built by one person doing all the emotional work. Sometimes silence isn't empty at all. Sometimes it's the place where truth finally has enough room to speak. Growth rarely begins with comfort. Most people don't change because someone politely asks them to. They change when life places a mirror in front of them, leaving no place to hide from the truth. As long as one person keeps fixing every misunderstanding, starting every conversation, and making every sacrifice, the other person can go through the relationship without ever questioning their own behavior. It's easy to believe everything is fine when someone else is constantly carrying the weight. But the moment that effort disappears, the silence becomes a reflection that cannot be ignored. When you stop chasing, You don't just create distance, you create awareness. Suddenly, the routines that once seemed automatic are gone. The messages don't arrive. The invitations stop. The emotional safety net isn't there anymore. At first, he may not notice. Habits have a way of making people believe tomorrow will always look like today. But eventually reality catches up, and that's when the questions begin. Did I stop trying? Did I become emotionally unavailable? Did I assume she would always be there, no matter how little effort I gave? Those are difficult questions because honest answers require humility. Pride tells us we've done nothing wrong. Ego whispers that someone else is overreacting. But deep down, when the noise settles, the truth has a way of finding its voice. Every person reaches a moment when they have to decide whether they'll protect their pride or face their reality. Only one of those choices leads to growth. Think about a family business where one employee quietly handles countless responsibilities every single day. They solve problems before anyone notices them, support the team, and keep everything running smoothly. Because they're so dependable, people stop recognizing just how much they contribute. Then one day they leave. Suddenly deadlines are missed, confusion spreads, and everyone realizes how much depended on one person's consistent effort. The value wasn't created by their absence. Their absence simply revealed the value that had always been there. Relationships often follow the same pattern. Consistency can become invisible when it's always present. That's why appreciation should never wait until someone walks away. Unfortunately, many people only recognize genuine effort after they no longer have access to it. But understand this clearly. Your silence should never be about revenge. It's not about making someone feel guilty or teaching them a lesson. If your only goal is to make someone suffer, you'll end up carrying bitterness instead of healing. Choosing yourself isn't an act of punishment. It's an act of self-respect. There's a world of difference between walking away to manipulate someone and stepping back because you've realized your heart deserves the same care you've been giving to others. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make doesn't require raised voices or dramatic speeches. It comes from quietly refusing to accept less than the respect you know every healthy relationship requires. Actions speak with a kind of honesty that words often fail to achieve. When your actions begin matching your standards, people notice, not because you're demanding attention, but because you've stopped accepting imbalance as normal. Whether he reflects on his actions is ultimately his responsibility. You cannot force someone to grow, just as you cannot force a seed to bloom before its season. Real change only happens when a person chooses it for themselves. Some will recognize their mistakes and become better because of them. Others will cling to excuses until every meaningful connection slips away. That decision belongs to them. Your responsibility is different. Your responsibility is to stop abandoning yourself in hopes of being chosen by someone else. The healthiest relationships are built when two people willingly carry the weight together, not when one person sacrifices their peace while the other simply enjoys the comfort. The moment you recognize that truth, you stop asking whether you're enough and start asking whether the relationship is giving you the same honesty, effort, and respect that you're so willing to give. That question has the power to change not only one relationship, but the rest of your life. Respect isn't something you can beg for. It isn't created by sending one more message, making one more excuse, or sacrificing one more piece of yourself in the hope that someone will finally recognize your worth. Real respect begins the moment you decide that your boundaries matter just as much as your feelings. The truth is, people learn how to treat us by watching what we continue to accept. Every time you ignore your own standards to keep someone comfortable, you quietly teach them that your limits can always be moved. There comes a point when love and self-respect stand at a crossroads. One road says, keep proving yourself, keep chasing, keep giving, even when nothing comes back. The other road says, you have already shown your heart. Now let your actions reflect your value. Choosing the second path doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you finally started caring about yourself too. When you calmly match someone's distance, instead of desperately trying to close the gap alone, you send a message without saying a single word. You show that your peace isn't something you'll trade for temporary attention. You show that your happiness isn't dependent on someone else's inconsistent effort. That's not pride. That's emotional maturity. Imagine standing in a long line where everyone keeps pushing forward, afraid they'll lose their place. Then one person quietly steps out because they realize the destination isn't worth the struggle anymore. People notice, not because that person made a scene, but because confidence often speaks through quiet decisions rather than loud announcements. The same thing happens in relationships. When you stop fighting to convince someone of your value, they often begin seeing what your constant effort had hidden. Confidence has a unique kind of power. It doesn't demand to be seen. It doesn't need applause or constant reassurance. It comes from knowing who you are, what you deserve, and refusing to settle for less. That kind of confidence changes the atmosphere around you. It changes the conversations you tolerate, the behavior you accept, and the relationships you choose to keep. Many people mistake boundaries for walls. They think saying no means you're cold or uncaring. But healthy boundaries don't keep love out. They keep disrespect out. They protect your emotional well-being so that genuine love has a chance to grow. A garden without a fence doesn't become more welcoming. It becomes vulnerable to anything that wanders through. Your heart deserves protection in the same way. Think about someone who owns a small business built through years of hard work. They don't give away everything for free simply because people ask. They understand the value of what they've created. That doesn't make them selfish, it makes them wise. Your emotional energy works the same way. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every moment of support is valuable. If you give it away without balance or appreciation, you'll eventually find yourself emotionally exhausted. The strongest relationships aren't built on one person constantly overextending themselves while the other simply receives. They're built on mutual effort. Both people choose each other. Both people communicate. Both people make sacrifices. Both people respect each other's boundaries because they understand that love grows where respect lives. There will always be people who only appreciate your presence after you've stepped away. Some will suddenly reach out, not because they've changed, but because they've lost the comfort of knowing you would always stay. That's why it's important to pay attention not only to their words, but also to their actions. Promises are easy to make when someone fears losing you. Consistency is what reveals genuine character. At the same time, something remarkable begins happening within you. Every boundary you honor strengthens your confidence. Every moment you choose peace over desperation reminds you that your identity isn't built on someone else's approval. You begin attracting healthier relationships because you've stopped settling for unhealthy patterns. You stop confusing attention with respect and effort with love. The greatest lesson isn't whether someone comes back or finally recognizes your worth. The greatest lesson is realizing that the moment you started respecting yourself, you stopped asking others for permission to feel valuable. And once that understanding takes root, no amount of distance, silence, or rejection can take away the strength you've built inside yourself. There is something about distance that strips away illusion. When life becomes quiet, when the constant messages stop, when the routine of always having someone there suddenly changes, people are left alone with one thing they cannot escape: the truth. In the noise of everyday life, it's easy to mistake convenience for connection. It's easy to believe someone matters simply because they're always around. But when that presence is no longer guaranteed, the heart begins asking questions the mind has been avoiding. Space has a remarkable way of revealing what words often cannot. If someone's feelings were built only on habit, then distance usually makes them drift even farther away. But if the connection was genuine, something different happens. They begin noticing the little moments they once overlooked. A familiar laugh echoes in their memory. A conversation they didn't fully appreciate suddenly carries new meaning. They remember how safe they felt sharing their fears, how someone celebrated their victories, or how they were supported through difficult seasons without expecting anything in return. Think about a childhood home. While you're living there, it's simply part of everyday life. The walls, the rooms, the familiar sounds all seem ordinary. But years later, when you return after a long absence, every corner carries emotion. Every detail reminds you of moments that shaped who you became. The home didn't suddenly become valuable. You simply gained the perspective to recognize what had always been there. Relationships often follow that same pattern. Sometimes distance doesn't create appreciation, it uncovers it. Psychologists have long observed that periods of separation often help people evaluate the importance of their relationships more clearly. Without constant interaction, the brain naturally reflects on emotionally meaningful experiences. This doesn't guarantee someone will change, nor does it mean every relationship deserves another chance. It simply reminds us that genuine emotions are often tested by time and space rather than by constant closeness. But there is another side to this truth, and it may be the most important one. Distance doesn't only reveal genuine love, it also exposes illusion. If someone disappears without looking back, if they never notice your absence or never make an effort to reconnect, painful as that may be, you've learned something valuable. You've gained clarity instead of remaining trapped in uncertainty. Sometimes the hardest answers are also the ones that free us. Too many people spend years trying to convince someone to love them the way they deserve. They mistake persistence for hope and sacrifice for proof of commitment. But love isn't measured by how much pain you're willing to endure. Love is measured by mutual effort, shared respect, and a willingness to choose each other consistently. One person cannot build a healthy relationship alone, no matter how deep their feelings may be. Imagine planting two trees side by side. You water one every day while completely neglecting the other. Over time, one grows strong while the other struggles to survive. Relationships are no different. Growth requires care from both sides. If only one person continues investing while the other simply enjoys the shade, the imbalance eventually becomes impossible to ignore. That is why stepping back isn't about playing games or trying to make someone jealous. It's about giving reality room to speak. It allows both people to see the relationship without the constant effort of one person hiding the cracks. If the connection is real, both hearts will recognize its value and move toward each other. If it isn't, no amount of chasing could have created something that wasn't there to begin with. The beautiful part is that clarity is never a loss. It may hurt for a while, but confusion hurts much longer. Knowing where you truly stand allows you to stop wasting energy on uncertainty and begin investing in a life that reflects your worth. You stop measuring yourself by someone else's inconsistency and start measuring yourself by your own growth, your own peace, and your own integrity. In the end, distance doesn't decide the future of a relationship. It simply reveals what already exists beneath the surface. Strong connections don't disappear because of healthy space. They become more honest. Weak connections don't fail because someone stepped back. They fail because there was never enough mutual effort holding them together in the first place. And once you understand that, you stop fearing distance and start appreciating the truth it reveals. The greatest surprise in all of this is that the biggest change doesn't happen inside the other person. It happens inside you. At first, you think stepping back is about understanding what they're going to do, what they're going to feel, or whether they're finally going to recognize your worth. But as the days pass, something unexpected begins to unfold. Your focus slowly shifts. Instead of watching their every move, you start paying attention to your own life again. And that single change has the power to transform everything. For so long, your happiness may have depended on a notification, a phone call, a reply, or a sign that someone still cared. Without realizing it, you handed another person the keys to your emotional peace. Every unanswered message felt like rejection. Every delayed response became a reason to question yourself. You weren't just waiting for attention. You were waiting for permission to feel enough. But then something changes. You wake up one morning and realize the world didn't stop turning because someone stopped texting. The sun still rises. Your dreams are still waiting for you. Your family still loves you. Your friends still laugh with you. Opportunities still exist. Life has been moving forward all along. And for the first time in a long while, you decide to move with it instead of standing still. That is where real freedom begins. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every single day. At first, you barely notice the weight because you've grown used to it. But the moment you finally set it down, you realize how exhausted you've been. That's what happens when you stop carrying the emotional burden of trying to make someone choose you. You discover that the constant anxiety, overthinking, and self-doubt were never meant to be permanent companions. They were weights you kept picking up because you believed love required endless sacrifice. Healthy love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. It doesn't demand that you shrink your dreams, silence your needs, or constantly question your value. The strongest relationships are built between two complete people who choose to walk beside each other, not one person carrying another while forgetting their own path. As you begin investing in yourself again, remarkable things start happening. You rediscover hobbies you neglected. You spend more time with people who genuinely appreciate your presence. You chase goals that had been waiting in the background while your attention was consumed by someone else's inconsistency. You laugh more freely. You sleep more peacefully. You begin to recognize the version of yourself that existed long before you believed your worth depended on someone else's affection.